Chapter 18 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 18. The Jolly Sandboys was a small roadside inn of pretty ancient date, with a sign representing 3 sandboys increasing their jollity with as many jugs of ale and bags of gold, creaking and swinging on its post on the opposite side of the road. As the travellers had observed that day, many indications of their drawing nearer and nearer to the race town, such as gipsy camps, carts laden with gambling booths and their appurtenances, itinerant showmen of various kinds, and beggars and trampers of every degree, all wending their way in the same direction. Mr Codlin was fearful of finding the accommodations forestalled. This fear increasing as he diminished the distance between himself and the hostelry, he quickened his pace, and, notwithstanding the burden he had to carry, maintained a round trot until he reached the threshold. Here he had the gratification of finding that his fears were without foundation, for the landlord was leaning against the doorpost, looking lazily at the rain, which had by this time begun to descend heavily, and no tinkling of cracked bell, nor boisterous shout, nor noisy chorus gave note of company within. 'All alone?' said Mr Codlin, putting down his burden and wiping his forehead. 'All alone as yet,' rejoined the landlord, glancing at the sky, 'but we shall have more company to-night, I expect. Here, one of you boys, carry that show into the barn. Make haste in out of the wet, Tom. When it came on to rain, I told them to make the fire up, and there's a glorious blaze in the kitchen, I can tell you.' Mr Codlin followed with a willing mind, and soon found that the landlord had not commended his preparations without good reason. A mighty fire was blazing on the hearth, and roaring up the wide chimney with a cheerful sound, which a large iron cauldron, bubbling and simmering in the heat, lent its pleasant aid to swell. There was a deep, red, ruddy blush upon the room, and when the landlord stirred the fire, sending the flames skipping and leaping up, when he took off the lid of the iron pot, and there rushed out a savoury smell, while the bubbling sound grew deeper and more rich, and an unctuous steam came floating out, hanging in a delicious mist above their heads, when he did this, Mr Codlin's heart was touched. He sat down in the chimney corner, and smiled. Mr Codlin sat smiling in the chimney corner, eyeing the landlord as with a roguish look he held the cover in his hand, and, feigning that his doing so was needful to the welfare of the cookery, suffered the delightful steam to tickle the nostrils of his guest. The glow of the fire was upon the landlord's bald head, and upon his twinkling eye, and upon his watering mouth, and upon his pimpled face, and upon his round fat figure. Mr Codlin drew his sleeve across his lips, and said in a murmuring voice, 'What is it?' 'It's a stew of tripe,' said the landlord, smacking his lips, 'and cow heel,' smacking them again, 'and bacon,' smacking them once more, 'and steak,' smacking them for the 4th time, 'and peas, cauliflowers, new potatoes, and sparrow grass, all working up together in one delicious gravy.' Having come to the climax, he smacked his lips a great many times, and having a long hearty sniff of the fragrance that was hovering about, put on the cover again with the air of one whose toils on earth were over. 'At what time will it be ready?' asked Mr Codlin faintly. 'It will be done to a turn,' said the landlord, looking up to the clock, and the very clock had a colour in its fat white face, and looked a clock for Jolly Sandboys to consult. 'It will be done to a turn at 22 minutes before 11. 'Then,' said Mr Codlin, 'fetch me a pint of warm ale, and don't let nobody bring into the room even so much as a biscuit till the time arrives. Nodding his approval of this decisive and manly course of procedure, the landlord retired to draw the beer, and presently returning with it, applied himself to warm the same in a small tin vessel shaped funnel-wise, for the convenience of sticking it far down in the fire and getting at the bright places. This was soon done, and he handed it over to Mr Codlin with that creamy froth upon the surface which is one of the happy circumstances attendant on mulled malt. Greatly softened by this soothing beverage, Mr Codlin now bethought him of his companions, and acquainted mine host of the Sandboys that their arrival might be shortly looked for. The rain was rattling against the windows and pouring down in torrents, and such was Mr Codlin's extreme amiability of mind, that he more than once expressed his earnest hope that they would not be so foolish as to get wet. At length they arrived, drenched with the rain, and presenting a most miserable appearance, notwithstanding that Short had sheltered the child as well as he could under the skirts of his own coat, and they were nearly breathless from the haste they had made. But their steps were no sooner heard upon the road than the landlord, who had been at the outer door anxiously watching for their coming, rushed into the kitchen and took the cover off. The effect was electrical. They all came in with smiling faces, though the wet was dripping from their clothes upon the floor, and Short's first remark was, "What a delicious smell!" It is not very difficult to forget rain and mud by the side of a cheerful fire and in a bright room. They were furnished with slippers and such dry garments as the house of their own bundles afforded, and ensconcing themselves, as Mr Codlin had already done, in the warm chimney corner, soon forgot their late troubles, or only remembered them as enhancing the delights of the present time. Overpowered by the warmth and comfort and the fatigue they had undergone, Nelly and the old man had not long taken their seats here, when they fell asleep. "Who are they?" whispered the landlord. Short shook his head, and wished he knew himself. "Don't you know?" asked the host, turning to Mr Codlin. "Not I," he replied. "They're no good, I suppose." "They're no harm," said Short. "Depend upon that. I'll tell you what, it's plain that the old man an't in his right mind." "If you haven't got anything newer than that to say," growled Mr Codlin, glancing at the clock, "you'd better let us fix our minds upon the supper, and not disturb us." "Hear me out, won't you?" retorted his friend. "It's very plain to me, besides, that they're not used to this way of life. Don't tell me that that handsome child has been in the habit of prowling about as she's done these last 2 or 3 days. I know better." "Well, who does tell you she has?" growled Mr Codlin, again glancing at the clock, and from it to the cauldron. "Can't you think of anything more suitable to present circumstances than saying things and then contradicting them?" "I wish somebody would give you your supper," returned Short, "or there'll be no peace till you've got it. Have you seen how anxious the old man is to get on? Always wanting to be further away, further away. Have you seen that?"
"Ah! What then?"
muttered Thomas Codlin.
"This then," said Short. "He has given his friends the slip. Mind what I say. He has given his friends the slip, and persuaded this delicate young creature, all along of her fondness for him, to be his guide and travelling companion, whereto he knows no more than the man in the moon. Now, I'm not a going to stand that." "You're not a going to stand that?"
cried Mr Codlin, glancing at the clock again, and pulling his hair with both hands in a kind of frenzy. But whether occasioned by his companion's observation, or the tardy pace of time, it was difficult to determine.
"Here's a world to live in."
"I," repeated Short emphatically and slowly, "am not a going to stand it. I'm not a going to see this fair young child a falling into bad hands, and getting among people that she's no more fit for than they are to get among angels as their ordinary chums. Therefore, when they develop an intention of parting company from us, I shall take measures for detaining of 'em, and restoring them to their friends, who, I dare say,